Dear students, in the last lecture, we have seen that the United Nations Secretary General holds an important position and role within the UN system. He serves as the Chief Administrative Officer and holds significant influence on the global stage. We have also seen the appointment process as well as we have also seen the tenure of the Secretary General. In today's lecture, we are going to discuss the powers and functions of the Secretary General of the UN as well as his position within the UN system. In our previous lecture, we have discussed administrative powers and functions of the UN Secretary General as well as his financial powers and functions. Now we are going to discuss the political functions of the UN Secretary General. The political functions of the UN Secretary General revolve around their role as a global diplomat, mediator, and advocate for peace, security, human rights, and international cooperation. While the UN Secretary General's administrative duties involve managing the UN Secretariat, their political functions are more focused on external engagement and leadership in addressing global challenges. Some of the key political functions, powers of the UN Secretary General are: the UN Secretary General acts as the chief diplomatic representative of the UN. He represents the UN in international forums, negotiations, and diplomatic initiatives. He also engages with world leaders, governments, regional organizations, and other stakeholders to advance to promote the UN's objectives and promote dialogue, cooperation, and mutual understanding. One of the primary political function of the UN Secretary General is to prevent and resolve conflicts around the world. To resolve and to prevent conflicts, he uses his good offices to facilitate dialogue, mediation, and negotiation among conflicting parties to prevent violence and to promote peaceful resolution of disputes. The UN's Secretary General may also appoint special envoys or representatives to assist in mediation efforts and support peace building initiatives. The UN Secretary General also plays a crucial role in promoting peace and security globally by advocating for conflict prevention, peacekeeping, and peacemaking efforts. He works closely with the UN Security Council, regional organizations, and other stakeholders to address threats to international peace and security, such as armed conflicts, terrorism, and nuclear proliferation. In times of humanitarian crisis, the UN Secretary General also provides leadership role and mobilizes international support for humanitarian assistance to affected populations. He tries to raise awareness about humanitarian needs, advocates for respect for international humanitarian law, and coordinates humanitarian response efforts with other UN agencies, governments, and humanitarian organizations. The UN Secretary General also tries to promote human rights and development as fundamental pillars of the UN's work. He advocates for the protection for the promotion of human rights worldwide, including the rights of women, children, refugees, and marginalized groups. The UN Secretary General also supports efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by mobilizing political will and resources for sustainable development initiatives. The UN Secretary General also uses his office as a platform to raise awareness about pressing global challenges such as terrorism, climate change, poverty, inequality, and pandemics. He advocates for multilateral solutions to these challenges and calls on member states to fulfill their commitments under international agreements and treaties. The UN Secretary General also leads by example in promoting ethical leadership, integrity, and accountability within the UN and beyond. So, dear students, these political functions of the UN Secretary General are essential for advancing the principles and purpose of the United Nations. These political functions are also essential to promote international cooperation and dialogue and to address complex global issues that require collective action and solidarity among nations. By leveraging their diplomatic skills, moral authority, and convening power, the UN Secretary General also plays an important role in shaping the international agenda and in promoting a more peaceful, prosperous, and equitable world. The next important function of the UN Secretary General is representational functions. Secretary General has also representational functions to perform. The representational functions of the United Nations Secretary General involve like acting as the face of the UN, representing its values, principles, objectives to various stakeholders around the world. These functions include diplomatic engagements, advocacy efforts, and symbolic gestures aimed at promoting the UN's mission and promoting international cooperation. Some of the key representational functions of the UN Secretary General are: number one, diplomatic representation. Dear students, the UN Secretary General serves as the chief diplomatic representative of the United Nations, representing the organization in high level diplomatic engagements, international conferences, and diplomatic initiatives. He engages with world leaders, governments, regional organizations, and other stakeholders to advocate for UN priorities, promote dialogue, and strengthen priorities, partnerships for global peace, security, and development. The UN Secretary General also engages in advocacy efforts to raise awareness about pressing global challenges such as climate change, poverty, inequality, and human rights violations. He uses his platform to highlight the importance of international cooperation, collective action in addressing these challenges and advancing the UN's agenda for peace, prosperity, and sustainability. In times of humanitarian crisis, the UN Secretary General provides leadership and advocacy for humanitarian assistance to affected populations. He raises awareness about humanitarian needs, advocates for respect for international humanitarian law, and mobilizes support from member states, governments, and humanitarian organizations to address humanitarian agencies and alleviate human suffering. The UN Secretary General also participates in various symbolic gestures and events to promote the values and principles of the United Nations. This may include delivering keynote speeches at important international gatherings, attending commemorate events, hosting diplomatic receptions, and participating in cultural exchanges to promote dialogue and understanding among nations. The UN Secretary General also represents and interprets the mandates of the United Nations to external audiences, including member states, non governmental organizations, civil society groups, and the media. He articulates the UN's position on key issues, advocates for the implementation of UN resolutions and decisions, and explain the organization's role in addressing global challenges and promoting peace, security, and development. The UN Secretary General also engages in cultural diplomacy to promote cross cultural understanding, toleration, and cooperation among nations. He participates in cultural events, promotes cultural exchange, and supports initiatives that celebrate the diversity of cultures and promote intercultural dialogue as a mean of building bridges and promoting peace. So we can say the representational functions of the UN Secretary General are essential for enhancing the visibility, credibility, and impact of the United Nations on the global stage. By serving as a global statesperson and advocate for multilateralism, the UN Secretary General plays an important role in advancing the UN's mission of promoting peace, security, human rights, and sustainable development worldwide. So, dear students, in conclusion, we can say that the United Nations Secretary General holds an important role within the UN system that includes administrative, financial, political, and representational functions. The UN Secretary General's powers and functions are, as I told you, outlined in the UN Charter and enable him to lead the organization in addressing global challenges, promoting peace, security, development, and human rights worldwide. By effectively leveraging his authority and leadership, the UN Secretary General plays an important role in advancing the principles and objectives of the United Nations and shaping a more peaceful, prosperous, and equitable world for all of us. So it is now clear from our discussion about the powers and functions performed by the UN Secretary General that he occupies an important position within the UN system because he serves as the chief administrative officer of the UN. So, as a chief administrative officer, he oversees the day to day operations of the UN Secretariat, which is the administrative arm of the UN, responsible for implementing the decisions of the General Assembly and other UN bodies. He also manages personnel, finances, and resources within the UN to ensure the effective functioning of the United Nations. The Secretary General also acts as a global diplomat. As the chief diplomatic representative of the UN Secretary General engages in diplomatic efforts to promote dialogue, cooperation, and conflict resolution among member states and other stakeholders. He also participates in international negotiations, mediate conflicts, and advocate for the UN's priorities on the global stage. The UN Secretary General also plays a key role in promoting peace and security worldwide by addressing conflicts, supporting peacekeeping operations, and advocating for preventive diplomacy. He works to resolve conflicts through dialogue, mediation, and other peaceful means to prevent violence and protect human lives. The UN Secretary General also advocates for sustainable development goals, poverty alleviation, environmental protection, and social progress. He promotes international cooperation to address these global challenges such as climate change, inequality, poverty, and mobilize resources to support these development initiatives. The UN Secretary General also promotes human rights principles and advocates for the protection of human rights worldwide. He speaks out against human rights violations, support efforts to promote democracy and rule of law, and work to advance the rights of women, children, refugees, and other vulnerable groups. Now let's have a look at some of the important Secretary Generals of the UN, like Dag Hammarskjöld. Hammarskjöld is remembered for his strong leadership during the Cold War period. His commitment, his role to conflict resolution, and his efforts to strengthen the role of UN in promoting peace and security is, is commendable. He also played a crucial role in mediating conflict in the Middle East and Africa, including the Suez Crisis and the Congo crisis. Another great Secretary General was Kofi Annan. Annan was a champion of human rights, development, and multilateralism. He played an important role in advocating for the Millennium Development Goals, which aim to reduce poverty and improve health and education worldwide. Kofi Annan was finally awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2001 for his efforts to strengthen the UN and promote international cooperation. Ban Ki-moon. Ban Ki-moon was another important Secretary General of the UN. Moon focused on climate change, sustainable development, and peacekeeping during his tenure as the UN Secretary General. He also played a key role in negotiating the Paris Agreement on climate change and advanced the sustainable development goals. Moon also prioritized conflict prevention and peace building efforts in regions such as Darfur, South Sudan, and Syria. The present Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, has been very vocal advocate for multilateralism, climate action, and conflict prevention. He has focused on addressing humanitarian crises, promoting gender equality, and reforming the UN system to make it more responsive to the needs of the member states and people around the world. So, these examples highlight the diverse roles and responsibilities of the UN Secretary General and the impact they can have on global affairs through their leadership, diplomacy, and advocacy. Studying the contributions of past and present UN Secretary Generals can provide valuable insights into the importance of international cooperation and the role of United Nations in addressing global challenges. So, dear students, in today's lesson, we have seen that the UN Secretary General occupies an important place within the UN system. He is holding significant administrative, financial, political, and representational powers. Through these powers, the UN Secretary General advances the UN's objectives of peace, security, development, and human rights on the global stage. By studying the contributions of the past and present Secretary Generals, we can gain valuable insights into the evolving role of the UN in addressing complex global challenges and promoting international cooperation.